Hey design enthusiasts, welcome to Next in Line Design, a podcast by the World Design Organization's Young Designers Circle. We're all about embracing a new mindset in design, one that's bold, innovative, and impactful. We're here to connect with the next wave of design talent and explore how you can use your creativity to make a real impact. Get ready for fresh ideas and inspiration from young designers around the world who are reshaping the industry. We're here to spark conversations, inspire change, and explore new ideas in design. But remember, these are just our perspectives on one big, evolving field. Please note that the opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official views of the World Design Organization or its affiliates. Let's dive in and see what's next in line.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Next in Line Design, a podcast created for and by young designers. My name is Arjit Singh, and I am a young designer originally from Delhi, India, traditionally trained in industrial design from Auburn University. I'm currently a UX designer in Toronto, Canada, and have been living here for the last few years. Aside from being a designer, I have also been mentoring young designers and also been teaching UX design courses at George Brown College. For over a year, I've also been a part or a member of the World Design Organization's Young Designers Circle, or the YDC as we call it. Today, I'm excited to be hosting this episode about the intersection of technology and mental health with a special guest, Jay and Arjit. Jay is an accomplished designer, entrepreneur, and thought leader at the intersection of mindfulness and technology, and has helped millions of people improve their well-being. His work and ideas have been featured by Harvard, MIT, TED, Forbes, CNN, Fast Company, and Vice. Jay recently also wrote a book titled Reclaim Your Mind, which I'm super excited to get my hands on personally. Jay, thank you so much for doing this, and welcome to Next in Line Design.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Nice to see you, Arjit.
Thanks so much. Okay, so before we move any further, would you like to give the audience a little bit more to chew on from your story, perhaps a little bit more about your design background? How did you get into design? And maybe more specifically into design about mindfulness and well-being.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming your audience have a lot of designers and people who are interested in design. So, I feel like as human beings, there's so many ways to tell a story. And I think talking about it from the lens of design, basically what happened was, here's the long and short of it. I was a young, curious kid. I was interested mostly in psychology. Part of that was because one of my parents had significant mental health issues. And that opened me at a really young age to kind of how much our experience of the world is shaped by our state of mind. And as I started to get into psychology in an academic undergraduate degree at McGill University in Montreal, I was introduced to design as psychology applied to technology. How do we understand people in order to design technology better? And that really lit me up. I got really excited about that work. I got into the field. I worked maybe 3-4 years in a boutique consultancy out of Montreal. And at some point I started to kind of burn out because I still love the process of design. And I've always been a gamer, and I love technology and tinkering with code as a kid. But the projects were really draining me. Who cares about this insurance website? Who cares about this little widget that someone is trying to create and make a lot of money for themselves? This doesn't feel inspiring to me.
Right.
And so at some point I had to kind of back off and say, well, how do I apply design to something that's more interesting? And it was around this time that I was also discovering spiritual practices like mindfulness and meditation, as well as understanding mental health more deeply, that I started to kind of integrate those understandings and eventually came to first academic and then startup. And now I have my own consultancy, but it's the inverse of that original interest. Where I was originally introduced to psychology that we can apply to make technology better, I started to get interested in what about technology to make psychology better? In other words, what about using technology to improve our well-being? And I started to find examples of that were inspiring, and that I got more and more involved in the field. And now I've worked on, I think, like over 50 projects where we're applying technology to try to make, people more sane, to help people practice mindfulness, to help people be more compassionate, and so on.
That's incredible. And just to perhaps like touch on what the timeline looked like for that. How long ago was that you first sort of got into, the switch?
Yeah. Okay. So I had that spark during my undergraduate degree, probably around 2008.
Okay.
And then 2007, 2008. And then it was around 2010 where I kind of got like burnt out on my regular consulting job. I did a master's degree, which was my first mindful technology project. It was a project called Sonic Cradle, which we can talk about. And I published a bunch of academic papers and went around the world to exhibit that 2010 to 2012. 2012, I joined a startup. We launched something called Muse, the brain sensing headband. I led product and design for that. It was this like kind of like a Fitbit for your brain while you meditate. So you put this mobile EEG sensor, like brain sensor, on your head while you meditate, and you get feedback on your brain data. And it was around the past 10 years, so like 2015 till now, that I started to like build up my profile and build a consultancy and start working on many other projects in the area. And at somewhere in there, I think probably 2019, I became a teacher in the Healthy Minds program, which is kind of like our free evidence-based philanthropic supported meditation app, which anyone can get from the App Store for free.
Right. So fairly early on, like right after you're still an undergrad, you're still figuring stuff out, and you're just like, I'm kind of done with this and I want to pivot into something completely, in a way that feels probably like very far away from design for a lot of people, right? Because design to them is just like aesthetics. And as we've been sort of working on, a couple of projects here at the World Design Organization too, we've seen that, right? Where people connect design to aesthetic, connect design to things, connect design to, how am I going to connect with products, really? And so you were sort of flying on the other edge of it.
Yeah, there's a couple of layers of that, actually. So first, it was that, right? Like that original spark was my awakening moment to be like, oh, design is so much more than aesthetics, right? That there's so much about understanding people and solving problems, not just functionality, which I know like there's that famous Steve Jobs quote. It's like design is how it works. Yes, functionality, but also like empathy, right? Like we are designers because we are trying to serve someone. We're trying to serve an audience. That's truly the heart of design. And if our projects were basically trying to serve our own bottom line, I mean, technically that's design, but I wouldn't consider it like the heart of design. I think the heart of design is a service mentality, which is like, we can use these tools at our disposal to make people's lives better. And yes, we have to support our bottom line. We have to kind of like, there are some realities to the situation, but ultimately that's why we're doing it. Now I'd go even further, which is like another layer that had to kind of unpeel a couple of years later, was the realization that like most technology is not living true to that heart. Like I think the idea of human-centered design is really about like, prioritizing the people we're serving. But it can be super easily exploited to like, let's understand people better so we can manipulate them. And unfortunately, our field has gone down that road a lot. So that was another unpeeling a little bit where I had to kind of like get off the beaten path a little bit and say, okay, is there a way to use design despite all these incentive and organizational structures that is truly of service to people, but also sustainable financially and serving the shareholder value and all that stuff, right? So it's been a couple of layers and I'm still peeling.
For sure, yeah. And to be honest, like I know I mentioned earlier that I'm, wanting to get my hands on your book, but really I have had a chance to, read parts of it, of course. So I definitely can't wait to get into the rest of it. But one of the things that sort of came from that was, this notion of fighting design through design, like you're sort of mentioning here. And one of the things too is just like, I think you had a quote there. It was like, inner peace won't come from rejecting technology. It will come from having a better relationship with it, right? There is a middle way. Perhaps you want to expand on that a little bit and talk to us a little bit about, what that really means. Because I know there's a couple of things in there that I personally already used, like, making sure that my phone's away from me, perhaps when I'm going to bed, or, naming my files or folders or apps, just like, do I really need to be doing this right now? Is this something that will add value to my life, or whatever that might be? So perhaps you want to touch on that.
Yeah, the journey continued because as I started working on these technologies for mental health and I started becoming more aware that a lot of mainstream technology was not necessarily designed with our well-being in mind, that's where the book came from. I started to think about, okay, hold on. As someone, there's a whole parallel story here about me getting deeper and deeper in my meditation practice.
Mhm.
And meditation, mindfulness, is fundamentally about harnessing intentional choice in our ability to pay attention. And a lot of mainstream technology has sort of been caught up in the attention economy, which is this term we use for like the race to command as much attention as possible, whether you're a content creator or a tech company with an app or a political party or whoever. The winners of the modern economy are the ones that can garner as much attention at all costs. So it started to dawn on me around 2015, 2016 that like these practices, these ancient practices of mindfulness are more relevant today than ever before because we live in an economy where everything is pulling your attention. And so the strategies in my book are all about applying these like time-tested wisdom and like modern scientifically validated practices of reclaiming your attention and reclaiming your mind and applying that to a world where, you know, our rivers are flooding with information. And, you know, we need to build a boat if we're going to survive. And it's especially true of the next generation. And I think it's a continuous line between those of us who actually design the technology and are thinking about how do we design more ethically. There's also scientists that I consider kind of attention activist peers of mine who are trying to study the impacts of all this technology. There's regulators who are getting interested on how we actually like manage and limit corporations and individuals and schools in terms of technology use. But my big message in the book is that as individuals, we are not powerless. Mindfulness teaches us that we always have choice in how we relate to our experience, and that goes for technology too.
So important. Yeah. And I think, you know, the different facets that you're mentioning, of course, like everybody's sort of working within their own realm of how much impact they can make, like, but it really starts with yourself. I think that's a huge thing. And one of the things that somebody that I've spoken to now a few times and somebody I really highly look up to, Sanjeev Sirpal, who sort of calls himself a near futurist, has mentioned, you know, like we're in this time of hyper distraction and hyper productivity, right? I personally have like my 3 screens, trying to get everything done at once, you know, making sure that I'm being that hyper productive self, but also at the same time, that makes me hyper distracted, right? As you were talking, actually, like my Alexa tried to send me a notification. And those are things, that's like a 4th screen, I guess, right? And then there's my phone, which is the 5th screen. So there's always something that is trying to grab our attention, like you're saying. And it really is about finding that balance within that, right? So I guess like one of the things that I wanted to talk about was like why targeting false urgency gives you the most leverage to manage your information diet. What comes to mind?
Yeah. So I've been playing with this for a long time because, as I mentioned, like I grew up on video games. I love technology. And as I got older and started to find practices of silence and practices of focused attention and practices of awareness, I ended up kind of burning out with the extremes because I, you know, worked in tech, loved to play games, loved social media, but I also loved to like go to a mountain and meditate for a week. And what was happening to me was, you know, those were both productive and good parts of my life, but there was this subtle undertone of dissatisfaction all the time. Because when I was immersed in technology, I felt like I was kind of betraying my mindful self and I wasn't taking care of my mind. But then when I went into retreat, I was feeling like this FOMO, like I was missing out on what was going on in the world and I was missing the stimulation. And that leads, you know, and you look around, look to your left, look to your right, it leads to all kinds of problematic patterns. So we all know someone who's just way into their devices with 5 screens and they just, and you look at them and you're kind of like, hello, are you there? Right?
Feeling targeted.
That's right. That's right. But we also know people who are they're kind of like wellness influencers or mindfulness people. And like anyone listening to this podcast might already think I'm one of these people, but I'm about to distance myself from them because we also know people who are like, oh, tech is bad and it's a problem and we need to like put our devices away. And like these companies are ruining our lives and kids shouldn't be on playing games and blah, 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 blah. But the reality is somewhere between. And so because I have these shared interests, I was forced in my life try to find a way to love technology and live mindfully at the same time. And so I've been experimenting for years with this. And false urgency is one of the deepest illusions and patterns I've found, which is why I don't know if you got to that part in the book, but I get a little ranty about it. It becomes a bit of a manifesto, because in reality, we actually, like, democracy needs us to stay on top of the news, right? We need to stay on top of our work messages. Social media can be fun and connective. We need to stay connected. But in all of these media, there's so much that is presented as an urgent emergency when it's not. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I guide people through when I'm working one-on-one is to take an audit of all your technology and the channels you subscribe to and ask one simple question, which is the level of urgency with which this information is presented aligned with the level of urgency it actually is? And what you'll find is, like, okay, if I get a text from my wife who's with my 6-year-old son, I actually do want to be interrupted with that. So all the people that are like, disable all your notifications, I'm like, no. I actually need to know if my son is okay, right? But if I get a similar ding and it's because some new app I downloaded is trying to promote something to me, that is not the right level of urgency. Same is true with work messages. If I get a message at 9 p.m., but I could have handled this at 9 a.m., not only is that an interruption, but knowing me and work and what you shared, like, we all try to seek value through productivity, which we can unpack. But like, I end up spending 3 hours worrying about whether my email was received the right way and whether a project is going the way it should, and starting just because I got one little ding. So that's the wrong level of urgency. And then the writing on the wall, the elephant in the room, news and journalism, the polarization and urgency, everything is an emergency, everything is a crisis, which not only is not true and, like, stimulating our nervous system to a level of stress constantly, it also makes it hard to identify which are the real crises, because there are sometimes real crises that need urgent action, but because everything looks like an emergency, we can't see that either. So to me, false urgency is my 2-word strategy to write on your wall when you're thinking about video games and TV and social media and your phone and your work messaging and your email, all the way to your news. It's a great principle and a strategy to keep you grounded on making sure you're subscribing in the right way to the attention economy.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. And like, one of the things that I've actually recently been on a couple of conversations about is this device that helps people, let's say with dementia, to reach out to anybody that they want to connect with, right? So they're living in a sort of house and they want to connect with, let's say, their son or something, and they can click on this screen and it'll send a page or a pager to, whoever this contact might be. And that's a level of urgency that needs to be taken care of, let's say, at the very moment that notification appears, right? But at the same time, personally, I've been doing this for, I'd say, like, the last maybe year or so at least, is put my phone on DND for a certain amount of time, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things, and I haven't gone to the part of the project where I uncover how that works, but making sure that notification or stuff like that will get to me when it needs to get to me, right? Because there is a lot of, value that technology does bring to our lives too, which one of the things that you have here, one of the quotes is how to reframe restrictive, strict tech boundaries as positive, fulfilling rituals as well, right? So that's, of course, like maybe a addition to what we're talking about here, where yes, it's important, but also there's fulfilling rituals with, let's say you said, Instagram or other social media that comes into play there too. So how do you, I guess, and I haven't gone to the part in the book yet, but what do you suggest to be that balance? Like, how do you really find that? And I know it's different for everybody, but anything that comes to mind directly?
It's all about intentional choice, and it's about navigating the extremes and not falling into those traps, right? So there's definitely going to be, on your Instagram feed, some wellness influencer dressed in all white, like living in a forest and like guilting you and shaming you with stats about how much time people spend on a screen and telling you should throw your phone in the lake and disable all your notifications. But if you've got a family member with dementia who's using that device, that's not useful advice, because I actually do want to know if that person needs me. Like I said, I do want to know when I'm out with my wife. I don't want to get dinged by every random text, but I want to know if the babysitter is having a problem because someone I love and care about needs help. I have knowledge that could really help in the moment. Like in a 3-word text, I could tell the babysitter, what to do because he's my son, right? And so it's about that intentional choice. But then again, if you rally against that influencer and you go to the other extreme, well, then you're like techno optimist, like AI is going to solve all our problems. We should just drive headlong into the singularity and, you know, basically like we'll never have to work again and all the problems will be solved, which is idealist on the other way. You know, so it does take some effort and intentional choice to navigate this, but realistically, like our ancestors, like we all come from a long line of survivors, right? Like your ancestors, my ancestors, everyone who's listening, by definition, the fact that you're alive right now means like thousands of years of people survived incredible change, incredible challenge for you to be here in this moment. And so, yes, this is our version. We're living through an incredible change. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Of course, we're going to have to adapt our lifestyle and put effort in new habits and find a way to kind of find that balance. That's going to be the cost of admission to be a well-adjusted, sane human being. Certainly for my generation, even more for your generation, even more for my son's generation, who's at this point, it seems like is going to just completely inherit a technocracy at this point. So like, if he doesn't have the ability to pay attention to how his attention is being pulled by these different devices, it's going to be really hard for him to be a happy person, right?
Yeah, and I think like happiness, you bring that up, which is like something that's so important, sort of thinking about, you know, how technology can affect that, right? There's of course like, you know, a nice rom-com you'll watch and that's great, but at the same time, there's like other darker, let's say, just to stay in the same realm, like movies that you'll watch that will put you in a very different mindset too, right? Mm-hmm. And there's so much technology that sort of is being used within that space as well. So one of the things that of course comes to mind from that too is like smart home devices, right? Personally, I've started to, you know, or I've sort of put this as one of those things where Alexa will wake me up and whenever I turn off the alarm, a meditation will start, right? And that's my way of waking up. I know that you've sort of mentioned this previously as well, is you know, using technology, of course, to help with some of this, to make sure that it is acting as a supporter, but not a deterrent of that mindfulness and of that attention and all of that stuff, right? So what is, I guess, like one of the biggest strategies that you think for my generation, but also the ones that are coming up that you want to bestow on?
Yeah. So again, awareness is the key here, and that's what enables intentional choice. So when we practice mindfulness, for example, and let's take a non-technological example, because I think it'll help really ground the concept.
Yeah.
A lot of great teachers of mindfulness and meditation will talk about this space between stimulus and response, which I think of as like space for choice. So I'll give you an example from my own life. Like before I went deep into these practices, if something made me really angry, I would react, right? So like my girlfriend says something that triggers me and I would be like, you know, bah, I would explode. How dare you? You know what I mean? And it would just end up doing something I regret, right?
Yeah.
But then like going down the path of mindfulness creates a split second of awareness where something triggers me, I notice it. I notice my body getting triggered. And there's just a split second of me being like, whoa, like a huge tidal wave of emotion is coming right now. Mm-hmm. And I get the ability in that little space to make a more intentional choice to not react aggressively, but to respond. So to say, oh, okay, hold on. Maybe I'm just going to walk away right now, or I'm going to take a deep breath, or I'm going to like rein in the insults and say something a little more skillful, right? Like that's like the space for choice. So to me, this is exactly at the core of why mindfulness is so relevant to the way we use technology, because when technology is pulling in our attention, we have all these urges and these cravings to check the feed and these notifications pulling us and these deep emotionally seated needs that we are subscribing to through technology, which often are illusions to satisfy those needs. When we're able to cultivate that space for choice, we're able to actually make more skillful decisions that lead to lasting well-being.
Yeah, so many good things sort of that you're sort of mentioning here, right? And I think the biggest piece is just like it is that coaching habit. It is that little bit of push that people will require. Like it's not just going to happen automatically. You can't just say, yes, I want to do this, and it's just going to happen the next day. It is it is like one of those muscles that you're having to train, right? Because my muscle memory might be, I'm just going to open up my phone and I know exactly where, let's say, a particular app is. I'm going to go and click on that. Just even moving that to a certain other place, hiding that app, whatever that might be. I think you sort of talk about this in your book as well, like is bringing friction to that process, right? Is so, so important. And that is the coaching habit for ourselves, right? My therapist has talked to me about this stuff as well. I think connecting it to something that he said previously, which is just like, we might get triggered or we might get angry in the moment about something that happened, but just like taking that one step back, perhaps, or taking a second and then looking at it again from a different perspective, a different mindset, a different state of, where you are when you're thinking about that stuff can be so important. But it is really about that coaching habit, right? Some people, of course, require a little bit more help, a little bit more push, whatever that might be. But others will be able to do that with one sticky note.
I'm with you around the coaching. I'm with you around the training. The neuroscience actually does show that these elements of awareness and insight are skills that are trainable. So it is absolutely true that like when you put that sticky and you work on those skills, that you're actually getting better at creating that space to make more intentional choices. But the other thing I'll say, having like really lived and breathed this for over 10 years, exploring this in my own personal life, is that there's an element of like, yeah, you might need to work hard at times and you need to work on those skills. Yeah. But there's two additional points. One is there's also a way to isolate those skills. And that's where practicing like journaling and meditation and these types of things, therapy you mentioned, like you can work on the skills of awareness and understanding your emotional needs and your triggers and bring that to technology to make it a little easier. So you don't have to like grind it out every day, like just forcing yourself to not do anything that's fun using all your willpower, right? Like that. So that's one side of the thing. The other thing is, and this is what the book is about, right? The book has 7 strategies in it. Strategies are not about working hard, they're about working smart. And the reason I wrote this book was that I was looking around and seeing a lot of people were starting to care about this the way that I've been caring about it. But they were trying to work hard, but they weren't working smart. And I realized like, oh, there's some things I've learned when trying to really confront this as a tech lover who also loves mindfulness that can help us work really smart about it. And that's where the strategies come in. Like, yes, moving an app and like introducing that friction or sudden absence, but also things about like being able to identify conceptual illusions, dissolving the false dichotomy between authentic. People believe that like in-person relationships are authentic and digital relationships aren't. And that's a false dichotomy. I have a lot of inauthentic in-person relationships and I have a lot of authentic digital relationships. And there's lots of little tricks to help nurture authenticity, both online and offline. And then there's false urgency, as we mentioned. And then the one thing which maybe we can talk about next time, because I know we're coming up at the end here, but there's also a whole cornucopia of technologies that are the kind of stuff me and my colleagues have been working on, which are the technologies that are intentionally designed to build the skills of mindfulness, build the skills of compassion. And yes, there's like generic meditation hacks, but the rabbit hole goes deep on those too. So that's where the strategies come in. It's like, it doesn't always have to feel like a grind. It can be fun, curious experimentation with your habits and routines, as opposed to feeling like, oh, I got to put this phone away, or like, oh, my screen time timer went off. It doesn't have to feel like that. That's in fact a sign that you're not necessarily skillfully approaching this.
So true. And just one thing I want to touch on from what he said is just like, those authentic relationships that can be built through screens. Of course, because I've traveled the last many years, like the last 10 years I've been outside of, where I grew up. So a lot of my sort of core connections are still back home, right?
Yeah.
Seeing them on video, sharing the smiles, sharing the laughter, sharing the conversations and the stories really puts me back to knowing that I have that support system, especially when it's required, right? And a lot of times it's just like, yes, there are people in the physical space that I can speak to, but it's just not going to give me that satisfaction. It's just not going to give me that happiness, that comfort, that, feeling of home, that perhaps a quick video call will do that for me, right? So I think, and this connects to like the last thing that I want to talk about here, which is just like designing for life experience, right? Not just perhaps like user experience. I think it relates to a lot of what we've talked about, right? Yes, there is the technology piece, but also there is the life experience of experiences over products. I think is the big thing. So just like, how do you frame that stuff is so important. How do you think of ecosystems like this, right? Like the one that we just talked about with your son. How do you think of ecosystems when you are designing? And what do you suggest people do to make sure they're building technologies that don't perhaps take away some of that attention, some of that freedom, some of that, quote unquote free will, but gives it back to the people to choose how they want to take that forward?
Well, let's put the free will question on the shelf, because that's a whole other podcast.
For sure, yeah.
You just threw that in at the end there. But your question is well taken. So here's what my experience has been. Okay, so I fell in love with user experience and human-centered design because of the heart of it. And I was a little bit heartbroken when I realized that our industry kind of just uses it mostly to manipulate people. And I think you and your listeners and anyone who might be in like a good company might see a glimmer of another way, that some organizations try not to do that and are actually trying to find that win-win between an organization and its audience. And sometimes even the win-win-win, which is the organization, its audience, and like society and the world at large, like that's kind of the holy grail. And as I developed as a designer, I started to get concerned about this because even the term human-centered design is anthropocentric. In other words, it's completely focused on human beings, but we live on a world with an environment and animals, and there's much, much more. It's fundamentally selfish to be human-centered. Like as a tactic, it makes sense because I'm designing this app, it's for a certain kind of human. So as I started to think about that, here's where I'm at with it. And I encouraged your input, and I encourage anyone who's listening to reach out if this really lights you up, because I have sort of formulated a framework for designing for life experience instead of user experience. You might call it life-centered design. And the way that I think about it, and there's some other, Jerome Sepulstra is also thinking about this from specifically an environmental lens. There is some interesting, it's sort of coming out of design justice and these types of elements, right? So here's how I'm thinking about it. What I'm realizing after designing for all these years is that when we engage in like a user experience research process, we do like rapid prototyping and human-centered design, we're not only just designing for an individual or like a certain group of people, we're actually designing for a specific part of the individual, a certain identity. So for example, if I'm doing like workplace SaaS software, I'm designing for Arjit in the moment that he's at work and he's in work mode and he's trying to like monetize his ad spend or whatever it might be, right? Yes, and I'm like designing for just that. I'm not designing for even Arjit. I'm designing for like Arjit with his work hat on in a specific task.
That's right.
And our incentive structure as organizations, even in the nonprofit space, which I do a lot of work in as well, the incentives are not really set up for us to expand to the larger field of possibility there. But I think we do as designers, our voice in the room is specifically one where we can actually extend, at least in certain ways, outside of that narrow perspective. Now, here's the field that I drew, and I can send you a link to the image that I've made and we can put it in the show notes. But basically, it's like a two-axis between anthropocentric versus biocentric. So at the bottom of this lens is the specific part of the human. And as you move up on this axis, you get to the holistic human, you get to animals, you get to protists and bacteria, all the way to the full ecosystem and the environment.
Yeah.
Mapped against a horizontal axis of time, past, present, future. And so, for example, I could look at that kind of ridiculously transactional example of like a SaaS monetizing ad platform. Mm-hmm. If I expand horizontally, I could say, okay, this is a specific part of Arjit, yes, but how does it build on like Arjit's past and what he's going to do before he reaches this interface? Mm-hmm. How is it going to reach the future, both the future of the monetized ad spend, but also like how Arjit feels at his job and his overall engagement of like this work? How can I design for that? Now, if I move upwards, how does Arjit as a whole, like, does he feel like this is soul-sucking work? Is this draining his mental health to do this, or is he engaged, his physical health, et cetera? So even in a really transactional example like that, if we can figure out how to expand on the life-centered design map and design for a larger context of life, that would be incredible. But I don't know how we line up the incentives to do that. And that's the thing I'm still exploring, and like in active conversation with some academics and some nonprofits, and saying, how might we like get this kind of approach to design to be like the next phase of our profession Because that's what the world desperately needs from us as designers. And right now we're kind of pigeonholed into the like specific work hat identity work. And I think as a field, a lot of us are hungry to look at a bigger part of that field. We don't have to look at all of it, but at least expand in some way. And I'm really trying to figure out how to do that. I don't have all the answers on that yet.
Yeah, I think it's really about balance. Everybody's different. Everybody's going to take those, particular things that they want to take forward. And yeah, that is a very complex problem to solve. I'm glad you're working on it. A lot of people, it seems like, are working on it too. I'm super excited to be diving into that deeper. I know the concept that you mentioned, I have definitely seen that on LinkedIn when you shared it. I know it's been a little bit of time since I saw that, but super excited to share that with the rest of the world. So this has been a pleasure, Jay. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I just want to wrap this up and want to ask if there are any last words to perhaps talk about your book or give you the stage essentially to wrap up.
I think if I think about like the thing that's alive for me in this conversation, I'm sure there are some people listening to this who are like, maybe came here because they're designers and they're interested in design, but like in their lives, in their personal lives, they are struggling with some of this, struggling with their relationship to technology and mental health and well-being and like feeling okay. And I think my last words would be for them to remember that, yes, there are big forces here. These technologies are designed to hook us. Regulators are falling behind. Scientists are not sure what's going on. And that can make you feel a bit like a victim, like we're just like another little node being pushed around by these big storms of influence. But if my journey has taught me anything, it's that as an individual, you have a surprising amount of agency and choice in how you interact with these technologies. And it doesn't have to feel like a ton of work for you to make some skillful choices. And I kind of believe, and this is what keeps me going, is that if more and more of us make those choices, and I think your generation has really led the charge on this, like if more and more individuals make better choices around technology, the market will have no choice but to follow. And so for me, there was thousands of years where mindfulness was a spiritual practice. In the past 50 to 70 years, it's become a kind of like, it's ingratiated in healthcare as a kind of mental health practice. Yeah. I think starting around now and for your generation and my son's generation, mindfulness is going to become an activist practice. It's going to be about standing up for sovereignty and freedom of attention in a world that like doesn't care about your mental health enough to give you space, that you're going to have to take that space. And you are not powerless as an individual. You can absolutely do that. And I'm here to help if I can.
Fantastic. Intentionality, I think, is what comes out of that. So thank you so much once again, Jay, for sharing your wisdom on the podcast and for providing us with a copy of your book, Reclaim Your Mind. A quick shout out also to Alexis, Divis, and José Tomas for creating this podcast, for helping with the production of this episode.
Next in Line Design is a podcast for designers by young designers. We hope that you really enjoyed today's episode. We've got some really exciting conversations coming up that we can't wait to share with you. Every episode, you're going to have the chance to meet a new member of the YDC. So enjoy our rotating cast of designers and feel free to reach out in the comments just to say hey, maybe to share some feedback, your story, or tell us more about the kind of conversations that you'd like to be hearing. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the WDO's channels and hit that notification bell so that you never miss an episode. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you back here soon with more of Next in Line Design.